Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes from Kern in Maine. Is there a standard naming convention for media files my high school level students should use as they create content? That's a QR code question.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
There's not a standard, like a industry standard, but you should have your standard. And I think that what works the best is that you have to, in general, you want to think of large things down to small things. So what I tend to do is I name things by the client that it's for, because that's likely going to come up again. I want to find all the stuff I made for company X. After that, I'll put the actual project that it's on, because if I do well with a client, I'll probably do many projects with them. And then after that, it'll be the element within that project. So quite often I'll do, like I'm currently working on a thing for a certain Bavarian car company, and we're going to make multiple videos for it. So it's going to be named after the event, and then it's going to be like day 1 open, day 2 open, et cetera, et cetera. So I do all that, and then camera files, I always retain the unique name that came out of the camera. And what I actually, in the Finder, I use the rename function, and there's a thing where you can, I think it's add text, and you add text before, you leave the original camera name, I put an extra dash at the end of what I add to it, and I string out all the stuff that's relevant for that particular thing. But although there's not a industry standard, you should have your own standard.
Go, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and you probably have to worry about students and trying to remember what the strings are. The one thing that I will highly suggest is if you really want to get them into something that this is going to be their life work, then if you're putting in any dates, don't do the U.S. date. Always do year, month, and day, or year, day, and month, like a European standard. So we'd have 2024-02-07 in the date there.
Mitchell?
I used to use 8.3 on my PC systems, and I don't know if that's still the case, but it used to be able to search them, had to have an 8.3 filing system. So I guess I'd have to ask Courtney, is it still the case with Windows?
No, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, just riffing a little bit on what was just said, that date format is really important, because eventually, since you're doing all this in a computer, you're going to want to sort things. So if you manage to do like 24-10-12 for the 12th of October in 2024, you'll find that really helps in terms of sorting to find out what's current, what is the most recent project worked on. So I always start all my files with that. I don't find I need to go to 2024, but 24-10-12 would be a typical date for me. And then at least I know I can pull all of those across all of my computer files and know what's the most recent. It really has been useful for me.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that the thing that you see the most in the industry, there is no real standard, but there is what you see the most, at least in visual effects, is what we tend to refer to as the ILM naming convention, mostly because they were first or near the beginning of it, and I think most people kind of take it on, and it looks very much like what everyone's been talking about here, which is that you start with the most general, and then you move to the most specific part of that file, and that way things will cascade. Excuse me. That way things will cascade together. And so what you end up with is that you have your so a lot of times it is the client, it is then the project, and then it is the asset, and then it may be a sub-asset, and then it may be a version. So that kind of goes that direction like that. The main thing that I would recommend that makes things a lot easier is to shorten things and make decisions about what those are. So what you want to do is we generally will shorten things to 4 or 5 characters, so that everything has 4 or 5 characters in it. And usually there's a bunch of meetings about this, about what we're going to do. And there's a 2 or 3 page document that says this is the naming convention for this project. So you might have, let's say the client is Apple, APPL. And the project is, I don't know, a keynote. So we might go key, I just blew it. APPL, and then you have, key or key N, and then you'd have the, the open, whatever. But and then you put underscores. You don't put anything else. If you put periods, it confuses everything. Like for us to work across all formats, no spaces, no periods, no slashes. So underscores for everything here. And so you end up with these codes that go all the way across. You might end up with 4 or 5 of those. And the main thing is I would recommend getting students used to that, because it really isn't a super efficient way to keep track of your files if you keep them in all the files there. And then for us, for naming conventions, we would typically not use Apple, for instance, because we don't usually put client names oftentimes in the files. We do sometimes, but it's pretty rare for us to want to put the file name in. So and with O9O, we worry about this a little less than we did for Pixel Core. Everything was like pretty secret, and so we made up names for everybody. So everybody had a code name, and every code name had a shortening. So like if you're doing something but you would derive the name somewhere. It was kind of an entertainment of what name will we give to the company. So like Google was, I think, Atari, because the Atari building is right next to the Google building in Paris, which we were at when we were thinking of it. And you'd have some kind of weird connection to what those look like. And so, it's more fun for the students to think about than necessary in high school. But definitely think about working in those codes. The nice thing about having all the same number of characters is that when you search it or look at it in a file, all the rows are perfect. So the thing is if you say we're always going to use 4 digits or 5 digits or whatever, and if you keep the number of digits the same and you just force everything to be concatenated into that, you end up with a really nice easy way to scan things as you go through it. And especially you can and also if you're running greps or if you're doing any kind of searching, you can say you can run a system that says go over 4 characters. So if you always do the same thing with with your naming convention, so you start with this, there's always going to be a guest category, or there's always going to be a category for each one of these. You can say go over 8 characters or 9 characters or 10 characters, read the next ones and put them here. Because you know where that's going to be, because you set all of those things to be exactly the same. So when you're doing more complex sort functions, looking for certain things, it's easier for you to find them if you use it. If you go down that path. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Kern, the other thing I'd say is there's a balance between what Alex is talking about being like super strict and also being able to find things. I mean, let's face it, we're going to search for things and we're going to search for things. I've gotten to the point where I'll add extra stuff into a file name, not a deliverable, but like a job folder or something, just so it's easier to find. And I heard it once said years ago, somebody said, Windows users name their files and Mac users describe their files.
Go ahead.
And there's definitely something to that.
Yeah. I guess what I would say is that it would be great to teach students from the beginning. They may decide to do something later that is less strict, but I think that it would be worth it for them to understand what a real file naming convention looks like. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, just one more thing. If you happen to be in the ad side of the world at any point in your life, you will come across these things called ISKI codes. And the reason that what we're talking about is so important is through the advertising industry. If you don't understand that and get that right, you're really not a serious player in there, because everybody in that system where spots are flooding the world needs to follow one standard. And while we're talking about it being loose for naming files, you will get into parts of the industry where it is not loose at all. And if you don't have the right ISKI code attached to a spot you're sending out, it literally won't run, and you will get all sorts of flood of emails back.
Yeah, so I mean, and again, I think that it's not so much that they may use those forever, but if I was teaching students, and when I do teach students, I do teach them those naming conventions, because it's good for them to understand what that is, so they know what a grown-up naming convention is. Whether they use it or not, they should at least have some experience with it and understand why it makes a difference. We have Brian Fisher is going to be here later in the hour or next hour. He is from Lewitt Audio, and he'll be talking about their microphones and mixers and interfaces, and so stay tuned for that. If you've got questions, of course, you can throw those into Mukana, and make sure to vote on those questions. So the voting is really important. It tells us what order you'd like us to ask them in. And if you're not in Mukana, of course, you can just use this QR code or just go to askofficehours.global. You can do that 24/7. Askofficehours.global. Do try to try to ask one question like at a time. If we see multiple question marks in your question, probably not going to ask it. So just one question in the QR code at a time, and we'll go from there. All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. When an international tour travels outside its home country, how do they handle wireless approval? From what I've seen with products like Wi-Fi devices, there are specific SKUs for each country, region that are locked to frequencies for that region.
Marty?
Yeah, when you're touring, particularly internationally, there are very few things you want to leave to chance. You want to make sure that your instruments are going to arrive intact. You want to make sure that you have your transportation prearranged, and you want to make sure that your wireless microphones are going to work. And because there's so many different frequency bands, and each location may have frequencies that are available or not available, and you may go on one side of town and a frequency will work, and then you go to the other side of the same town and it won't work. So you can do research in advance to find out what frequency bands are usable in different locations. But I would stay away from anything Wi-Fi for a number of reasons. And you can rent wireless microphones locally. That will have a much higher chance of working because they're local and the rental companies know what works there.
Good, Courtney.
You can bring stuff with you if you've done your research in advance. And you may want to bring multiple sets of wireless that are in different bands.
Good, Courtney.
Yes, when Marty said that, it's tough. There used to be bands that were international or travel bands, they used to call them, that would work across the United States. And wireless receivers used to be a problem in the United States because they were UHF, and there were certain bands that were available in certain areas because they'd be on a vacant TV channel. And as you traveled across the country, there'd be different vacancies on different TV channels everywhere you go. So you'd have to have frequency agile wireless systems. If you're traveling internationally, best thing to do is rent them locally, because you can get into trouble because frequencies that are perfectly valid here in the United States are government frequencies in Africa, and you can get in a lot of trouble. They will confiscate all your wireless gear when you arrive in that country if they find out it's on a government band. So be very careful. Coordinate if there is a wireless frequency coordinator at the venue. Always talk to them, see what frequencies are available at that venue, and rent microphones, any wireless stuff that you need to rent in that country.
Go, Jeffrey.
First time I had to do that was actually in London, and as Marty said, it's more of if you cross the street, you can't use the same frequency for your wireless microphone. There's a form that you go up on their website to fill out and get approval for if you want to use it on the street. I'd always have in cases like that. I'm always going to keep a corded version just in case. But when you get to places like the O2 Center, you're definitely going to be working with an RF coordinator, and they'll have their own set of frequencies, and your microphones might work there. So if you're definitely going into a big stadium like that, you want to work with the RF coordinator.
Yeah, and as Mickey mentioned, there is what's really coming out now is wideband RF, which is that a lot of these transmitters can do anything. You just have to tell it where they need to operate. And so those are, Mickey said this one. It's one of the reasons why broadcasters are using the Wisicom wideband products. I believe that the sound devices are wideband as well. So the A20s and those are also, I believe, those will handle all of those things. But yeah, generally you want to pay attention that understanding what the frequencies are is going to be important. And Mickey says that the A20 series is very wideband. Next question.
Femi Parker in London, England is up next, seeking knowledge on systems for hearing-impaired users, for example, hearing loops, a solution for large spaces. Are there any new solutions in the market trying to get away from taped floor induction loops as they regularly get sliced by carpet fitters?
Marty?
Yeah, I do a lot of induction loop installations and designs. If you're working in a space where the carpet is changed a lot, like convention floors, then induction loop is really, really risky for that reason, that it'll get that'll get cut up. But if it's a floor that gets laid with a carpet and it's there for a number of years, then you just have to be very explicit with the client and with the carpet contractor before they start working.
Can you explain, Marty? Can you explain how induction loops work?
Oh yeah. So induction loop is a continuous loop of wire that is run along the floor. Can be a simple perimeter loop around a room, but more often in large spaces. They crisscross the floor with two loops that are folded back on each other. And when you look at it, it's just stripe, 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 stripe across the floor. And what it does is it's driven by a constant current amplifier, and it creates a magnetic field in the room, very similar to how a transformer works. It's not radio. It's considered baseband. And the magnetic field is modulated by the audio signal. Then a hearing aid or a belt pack receiver will have another coil of wire inside of it, and as it's inside the magnetic field, it transduces the field back into audio, again, just like the other side of a transformer.
So it's basically like a giant it's a low-key wireless system?
It is a wireless system that works when you are standing within the field of the loop, and the magnetic field is rising and lowering and being modulated like a radio signal, but without a carrier.
Mm-hmm. And why do you use this instead of just a transmission?
Well, there are 4 different types of hearing assistance systems. There's induction loop, which is actually one of the oldest, and still the only one that a hearing aid wearer with a T-coil needs no other equipment in order to hear.
So it can work directly with their hearing aid.
Directly with their hearing aid without any latency, and it's mono. Okay.
Right.
The other 3 technologies is radio, so RF, that requires a receiver. There's infrared, which also requires a receiver and direct line of sight with the emitter that will be somewhere in the room. Mm-hmm. And the newest one is Wi-Fi, which has some interesting and new capabilities.
That's great. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, to me, I run across this in my early stage work because they're used a lot in larger legitimate theaters. I ran into them at Grady Gamage Auditorium, and they'll literally give you a little kind of stethoscope headset, and it's so much nicer if you're at a performance and you have any hearing impairment at all. So they know this really well. And I would ask some of the legit theater folks if there's any real cutting edge change in this, because you'd think that this would be something that Wi-Fi, particularly in larger venues where you have to deal with latency of the speakers and you want to enhance that rather than cut them off, that would be an area rife for innovation.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, they can get expensive, for professional work if you're having to do concealed in-ear listening for doing musicals or something. The phonak receivers do make that one's $1,700. That one is
but those are really built for performers. Those aren't really built for the phonaks aren't really. Those are for the performers. They're not really for the
audience.
This one's really for the audience.
To that, but for the audience, you can go with. There are systems that are made for public listening. Like this is a school system that's based for public listening that has one transmitter and multiple receivers. But the infrared, I think, is going to be your cheapest route. As Marty was talking about, you just put a couple of infrared emitters at the front of the theater up high, pointing down, and you hand out the headsets, and they have a little receiver that sits on the headband at the very top, so that's usually not occluded by anything, but it is line of sight.
But it does sound like the one that is the most, it is hardest because it might get cut up, but the one that is the cheapest or the least expensive, not cheapest, but least expensive, is the induction, because it means that you don't have to hand anybody anything. Oh, it's not. So Marty's like, no. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, it's a very expensive amplifier and a very powerful amplifier that has to drive that thing.
Right.
It's most labor intensive to design and install, and that makes it more expensive.
Got it. Okay.
The least expensive would be radio, because that's just a radio transmitter with a antenna that you slap up, and then you have receivers. They're pretty inexpensive. They run on a 72 megahertz band which is protected across the country, across the U.S. anyway. I think it may even be international.
Mm-hmm. Comtech is that kind of system.
Yeah, there's a number of companies
Comtech
that make.
says it's 75, doesn't it? It's instead of
Comtech
72.
runs on
Is it 72?
I think so.
72 and 216.
And 216.
216, yeah.
Yeah. And those are, very common in television broadcasting. I've seen induction loops used in television studios for talent with those phonak receivers.
Mm-hmm.
For theatrical, however, and I'm just coming across this now because I'm working with a theater, because induction loop and radio and infrared are all mono systems, the problem is that they don't give the viewer, the attendee, any spatial information. And so I just happened to be at a theater performance with a friend of mine who wears hearing aids and was telling her about this project. And she said, will it tell me where an actor is on stage so that I can be looking at the actor? And the answer is no. However, Wi-Fi now has the capability to transmit stereo and can include that kind of spatial information. With Wi-Fi, your cell phone is actually your receiver. You load up a free app, you select a channel. There can be multiple channels, like different rooms or different languages. You select a channel and you use your own earbuds. And there will be a bit of latency. It can be as low as, say, 250 milliseconds or less. But it will be high-quality audio and can be in stereo, and you can customize the look of the app as well. It's pretty interesting.
And Mickey suggests looking at Listen RF, and James Haldane also said Williams Sound. So RF might be a solution there.
Those are the two big manufacturers here. There is one more I should mention. People ask about Bluetooth for this application, and right now there is no published standard for Bluetooth. The ability to go one-to-many doesn't exist, but it is under development. I think it's probably a few years away yet.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from John Green in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and it is another QR question. I'm using Apple Notes and noticed that when Apple corrects spelling, the word is underlined in red. That's always meant a misspelled word to me. Can the color be changed, and any reason why they did this? And he also says, I'm a wildlife photographer who loves your show.
Thanks, John. I don't think there's any way for you to change it. This is kind of an OS. I'm sure it's an OS reasoning for that. I don't think there's any preference for that. So I think that probably not. Next question.
Patrick Denny in New York is up next. I'm trying to build a 360-degree classroom with 4 projectors and 4 walls. Is there a way to use Vision Pro to project what I'm seeing in Vision Pro onto the 4 walls? If not Vision Pro, how about any of the other VR headsets? Thanks.
I think that the question you would have for most of the headsets when you're viewing them, the real challenge is that you are only seeing what you're seeing, not the whole environment. So what you would need to do is you would need something else to project. You wouldn't be able to just take on any old app and do it, because what they're sharing, what the Vision Pro is sharing, what the Meta shares, everything else is your view, not the entire environment. And so as a result, I think that what you would need is an app that would project the entire environment both to the walls and to the headset. I think that one of the challenges you're also going to have there is, blending 4 projectors. You're going to think about 4 projectors, but it's really, you're going to end up with kind of edge issues and so on and so forth. You need some overlap oftentimes for those, but you could do it. What you're going to find is that unless it's very large, these are very bright, you end up with a weird vignetting around every wall. So the walls are all going to go a little darker to each corner. And so it's not going to feel, it's generally 4 walls is not going to feel like a 360 environment. You're going to need more to go around it, and you're going to need more overlap to make that actually work. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I saw a video on Instagram this morning where a guy had taken his Vision Pro and he built out his edit system. And then all through his house, he was like, my notes are next to the fridge. Yeah. My TV is in this room. And it looked like he did a photos thing right over a frame on his wall. It looked like he'd spent a lot of time positioning everything. And all I could think of was like, how do you do that every day. This was obviously a photo op, but it was pretty cool. I don't know if you can save a setup. Like,
I don't think you can yet, but I think Apple has been building the technology to do that, so that wouldn't be that hard. But to go back to the projectors, I don't know if that would represent that. Yeah, go Bill.
Well, I just think it'd be a fun art project to get 4 people in Vision Pros, have them stand back to back in a square, and then project those onto the 4 walls.
That would
see how it feels.
And that would be super chaotic because you'd have their head movement and everything else. I think I would probably not do that. But I do think you're going to have. I think you're going to have a challenge, and I guess I would. You can ask more questions in this area. I'm very curious what you would use it for. A lot of times we've done 360, and I will tell you from someone who's done a lot of 360 is that the ROI oftentimes for us has not been, like the amount of work it takes to deliver 360 is not paid off. And so there may be a way that you can do that. But if you're trying to do something that really feels immersive, you're probably going to not be able to do it with 4 projectors and 4 walls. You're going to spend an enormous amount of money on that. It'd probably be less expensive to buy all the students' Vision Pros and let them keep them than to try to do what you're talking about in a way that was really seamless. Next question.
Next question comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Vera, Florida. Advice on live streaming IP connectivity options for success in Africa. And it's Livingston. Live use cellular MUX. I think it's MUX. Reliable? Thanks.
Yeah, so the LiveView may work there. I don't know. So what happens with LiveView is they have to have agreements with the cell companies in the given areas. It's not, when you can get the lower cost LiveViews and just use local SIMs, and you may be able to make it work. And cellular in Africa actually works fairly well. It's probably not something that I would base a show on, though. I mean, so I would use it as something that I would add to it, but I probably wouldn't use LiveView. The thing that is the most available in Africa are satellite trucks. So I would really think hard if I'm doing something all the way down in Livingston. When we've solved this in Africa, we've typically used a sat truck, or it won't be a sat truck. Oftentimes it'll be a sat provider that's going to bring a dish and put it up and pointed at the satellite, and what's interesting in Africa is that the vertical is much higher. So it's actually easier to get out of Africa oftentimes than it is in other parts of the world because you're closer to the equator in not in all places, but in many places. And so Livingston, by the way, is right just north of Victoria Falls. So it's on the other side of what would be considered the town of Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. Livingston's right on the other side, and it's got a really nice sculpture park, in case you're wondering. Anyway, so but I would say that if I was left there, I would look at local bandwidth. I'd work with the venue to find out. There are, Zambia has great fiber there at times. Zimbabwe also has great fiber in some places where you're going to get a lot of connectivity. But I would back that up with a sat truck, and it depends on the year. Africa doesn't really have, most of Africa doesn't have much of a summer and winter. They really have rainy season and non-rainy season, and that's going to affect whether that sat truck is viable. A really, really heavy rain will knock out your sat truck's transmission. So you want to kind of think through that as well. But if you're in depending on the date, if you're in a drier time in Africa, in Zambia, and if you are, I would still think about that and then work with the venue. There's going to be less options to just run something in, but if you find a venue that's nearby, you can also look at taking in what we call air fiber. Ubiquiti makes these air fiber systems that will give you 1 gig full duplex to point up to 12 miles. And so you can look at, if you can see something else from where you're there, you can put that in there and point it at it. You only have to be plus or minus 2 degrees, or maybe 1 degree. So 2 degree window that you have to look out to. And so you can look at just piping it in. But I would not use any of these as the only point, that my only output. You need 2 or 3. In Africa, typically you need 2 or 3 outputs, and I would say everywhere in the world you need at least 2. 2 ways to get out of the system that are both viable, that you can feel like you can lean on for both of them. So those are the things that I would take into account. I know you've already reached out to me. We'll keep on looking for finding you some local assets to help you with that. Next question.
Miguel Fernandez in Phoenix, Arizona. Up next, how do folks like the Pro-Aim Sound Chief CV5 or other carts like this by Pro-Aim? I'm looking for a cart to have my recording equipment and mount a camera to for interviews, and he's got a link there to it.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I looked at this design. It's a typical sound card or video card arrangement. This one's designed kind of for rack mount equipment. The only thing that really worries me is this pull-out drawer for like a mix panel. It pulls out, it's on sliders, and you'll notice there's no diagonal support. It's only this little tiny one at the back, and if you put a nice Yamaha 22-pound mix panel on there and pull it out, it's going to pull the cart over, or it's going to break off at the back there. I worry about the fact that there are no diagonal supports in that, or front supports to the rack mount equipment. It is fairly reasonably priced for these kind of carts. These kind of carts can run you anywhere from $400 or $500, which this one is, I think, at $550 or something like that, up to $2,000 or $3,000 just for the cart itself. I would look also for a means to mount a mast to it, especially if you want to mount a camera to it, like a tripod head on a little mast, or for wireless receivers, a mast that can hold your antennas up. It doesn't seem to have any provision for mounting a vertical mast to come up off the top of it. So it would require a lot of modification to use it in the field, I think.
Good, Bill.
I've tried to do this. I used to do this a lot at Comic-Con, where I tried to take a camera on some sort of mast with a cart, and I was always unhappy with the results, and here's why. Having the camera mount attached to the cart and having a surface like this where you're tempted to work on and maybe type something on your laptop or something always made the camera shake. So I got to the point where I detached the camera mount tripod or monopod or whatever I was using from the rig so that I could still actively work with the rig on the cart and not mess up my camera shot. So a separatable camera was better for me than having it actually affixed to the cart, because it's just prone to too much shaking.
Good morning.
Yeah. So film sound people often use a lot of carts, and people who are doing electronic field production, because they're moving around with equipment and they need quick setups. So this is typical kind of vertical cart. Professional Sound Corporation, PSC, makes similar products, but they're not very stable. And depending on how much equipment you need to carry around and have set up for working, you may want to consider a four-wheel kind of cart. And two websites I'll mention are bigfootmobilecarts.com. But if you want to go all out, by far and away the best one is from Innovative. Innovative, but delete the last E, innovative.com. This is a four-wheel cart that has many, many options and attachments. It's solid, it's stable. There are big wheels that can lock, and you can put a camera pole on it that will be usable.
And you can see a lot of these carts at filmtools.com as well. I probably wouldn't recommend the Pro-Aim. The Pro-Aims are, hey, let's look at what somebody else did and copy it and do it for a lot less money. And every person that I've talked to with Pro-Aim have found that there's a lot of sharp edges. I mean, you are saving money. You're just trading money for time and stability. So you just have to know that it's not less for no reason. so it's less because it's less. So that's the thing you want to kind of think about with the Pro-Aim lines. But definitely these. I mean, obviously there's a lot of these sound carts out there, but I would look at some of those departments there. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer up next from Viera, Florida. Will Zoom ever output live captions as XML, etc., for use in other apps? I put in an FR for this years ago with Zoom feature request. It's frustrating.
Well, we saw Zoom do this at Zoomtopia. I think that there's a screen capture here. Let's see if I can get this up. So this is a screen capture from something that was Zoomtopia, and my understanding is this was Zoom OSC outputting this out and allowing it to be converted to the web view here. So I think that because we saw it at Zoomtopia, and because this is obviously something that's a value, I believe that these were translated captions using the AI system that Zoom has, that we'll probably see this in an upcoming feature release. My guess is probably sometime this year. Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Is there a microphone foot pedal that'll work for push to talk as well as muting?
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
There's a Rolls MS-111. It's got a big clicky button on it. You could use that on the floor, and I think a number of other people here are using that because they want to get the sound of the clicking of the mute button away from the microphone. So that makes sense to use a foot pedal.
I've gotten a few of the foot pedals, and I just find them to be difficult, and I can still hear the sound. I can actually hear the sound on the foot pedal more than I can hear the sound what I do with my hand. So I think I'd be more likely to continue to use one that is hand mounted. I know that I thought about it, but I just found I have like 4 of them, and none of them really work that well. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer, Vieira, Florida. What is your opinion on the Golden Age Pre-73 Mark III mic preamp?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I have not used this. There are a lot of these type of emulators that emulate tube type preamps. This one's fairly cheap, $349, and it has all the proper settings for 48 volt or dynamic, etc. I have not heard it for that price range. I don't know. I'd be careful. It might sound good. We have discovered a lot of good cheap microphones here. So
no, these are microphones though. This is
I know, but this is a preamp, but it may be noisy. That's
it's going to be noisy. Is what it's going to be.
Yeah,
go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with Courtney. I think the low price, is the flag that it might not be quite as good because high quality mic pre's like Neve or other things are very expensive. The other thing, they claim that it has the British sound, so I'm not sure what that means because it doesn't really have EQ as a switchable air button on it, which may do something. But it does have discrete components, meaning everything is point-to-point wired. So that's sort of like the old school way of building something.
Yeah, it'll be the old school hiss that you get with it most likely. Especially at $359. So if you want that old school kind of in the background, you're definitely going to hear it with this one.
And
so
it does have 80 dB gain. Most of that's hiss, I think.
Exactly. So I'm a big fan of clean preamps that are going to be quiet. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Blue Sky, the decentralized Twitter competitor, has dropped its invite codes and open to everyone. Could this finally dethrone the former Twitter, now known as X?
Go, Jeffrey.
Until this question just showed up, I completely forgot that I had a Blue Sky account. Last time I went on, they didn't have a desktop app; they just had the phone app. And since then, of course, now you can log in on desktop, and that's what I did. As for if it's going to be an X killer, I don't think. I'm not sure yet. I mean, there's still a lot of different types. You have Mastodon, you have Threads, and now Blue Sky that could really compete against the Twitter users, and there's still a strong base of people, X users, that want to stay on X mostly because they have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people following them there. So by going away from X, that means that they're going to be losing a very big chunk of audience for a social network that has little to no audience unless they can really build up their channels from there. And I think they've been working more on Threads than they've been working on any of the others.
Yeah, not likely. I don't think it's going to make any difference. I mean, it's an echo chamber in there. I'm in all of these things. They're just echo chambers. Like there's nothing. It's like yelling into a big open room. So there's the chances of this making any real. I mean, there'll be some geeks that use it, but I don't think that the normal people are going to use it. Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas. The Behringer Shark DSP-110 is out of production, and it's been a great performer for me on my hi-fi rig, or HF rig. What would be the replacement for this unit?
Yeah, I think that the Shark, I think if this is the same one that I've used in the past, this is something we use for basic delay and other things like that. Again, it was pretty, as I remember it, pretty noisy. That was the big thing that that was it. So it was pretty noisy. I don't know if there's a specific one. I wouldn't put a dedicated device in line to do what this was doing. I would just get a better recording device or better interface than using this as a discrete unit. It was not great. I had a bunch of them, and they're not great. Go to Courtney.
Yeah, I think his HF rig means his high frequency ham rig. So he's probably using it for ham radio. So, extended frequency response and accuracy is not necessarily what you're looking for. You're looking for something to cut through. And I'm not sure what DSP functions he was using on it. Probably wasn't using delay. So I'm not sure what
That's all we used it
features
for,
of that he needs to replace. But
we just found it to be really quirky,
we've been looking for those
noisy.
for doing delays for years, and they stopped making them, and they're scarce as hen's teeth.
Yeah. They're just really noisy and quirky, and are they sensitive to overmodulation? If you overmodulate them at all, they just rip the entire thing apart, which is why we stopped using them. Next question.
Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, BC, Canada. Is there a reliable chart that allows you to look up legal UHF frequencies you can use in countries outside of North America?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Reliable? No. I remember some people actually building some charts, but the problem is when you go country to country, rules can change really quickly. So you might be able to get a good solid chart for the UK and for Canada, but if you go outside of there, you might run into a lot more problems. And of course, like I said, those frequencies change, or the governments change the frequencies on a regular basis. So I don't think you can find something reliable. You still have to go to the country and go to their website and see what they've got for frequencies.
Marty?
I would just go to the manufacturers, the wireless manufacturers, Shure, Sennheiser, Electrosonic rather, or whoever you're using. They will often be the best source of information internationally for what frequency bands are legal to use in any location. And in larger countries, you'll be able to find that information on a localized basis, like per state or per county. So I would start there.
And Roscoe says you can also look at Shure's app. That's at p.shure.com/wwb. So next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael. A post house has adopted Resolve Studio as their main platform for audio post work. Wouldn't a dedicated digital audio workstation be a lot more versatile? And he's got a link there to the story.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Might have a lot to do with workflow. I mean, in the old days, we had dedicated DAWs because they were that sophisticated and we needed to have it specifically tuned to do audio work. But nowadays, that's not so much the case. It's much easier if you're in an edit program to be able to round trip it in Resolve to Fairlight. Or if you're in a Premiere Pro to go to the Premiere, I guess it's Adobe Audition, to be able to do it. So it's just more convenient to be able to round trip within the application that you're using.
You're not even round tripping at that point. Like you're just doing the work in that application. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the audio handling algorithms that used to live only in DAWs and things like that are now spread out. I mean, I've been doing all my audio work in Final Cut, which is a video editing program, for a while because it's just a subset of the code from Logic, so it's just as clean and just as useful to me. I don't need some of the things that a Logic user would want to use, so it fits me perfectly, and the audio quality is exactly the same. So I think we're going to see more and more people doing audio in a program that makes sense for them for their whole workflow rather than being specific, I must be using a dedicated digital audio workstation. At least that's what I see happening. They'll still be around, and they're still really useful for people who do high-end audio work, but it's not necessary anymore, as necessary.
And I think usually when we're talking about something of taking it in-house versus out of house, it's usually going to be, am I going to round trip to Pro Tools or not? And so they're probably making decisions about Pro Tools about whether they want to do that or not. And I think that the challenge that everybody has right now is that Blackmagic has a lot more engineers than everybody else. so that like a lot more engineers than everybody else. And so I think that some of the houses are going, well, we're not sending this out to an external house. We probably don't need to have, be able to interact with external houses. And so as a result, what makes it the most efficient for us? And in that case, Fairlight becomes something that's aggressive. And it's not that it's caught up to Pro Tools in any way, shape, or form, but it is the trajectory. You have to also look at the vector, like how fast is it going? And it's going. I mean, Blackmagic in general and Resolve is going faster than everybody else by a lot. And so that's the will they catch up is the question. And I think that some houses are starting to feel like they're close enough that they might as well jump on that train while it's moving. Go to Courtney.
And you got to remember that Fairlight was a hardware-based, mixing and recording accessory before Blackmagic bought them. And you can now, now that it's integrated into DaVinci, you can get these consoles anywhere from this cheap one for around $3,000 up to a $12,000 3-station rig for doing main mixing that interfaces with the Fairlight engine that is built into Resolve. So, it makes sense for them if they're basically a Resolve house to keep it in-house and rather than go to Pro Tools and come back. You let the people, the effects editors, the dialogue editors, completely work in Resolve, and it's all there when they get to the final mix.
Next question.
Another QR code submission. A Barara in Flowery Branch says, has anyone seen YouTuber Potato Jet interview of Claudio Miranda behind the scenes using a Tilt-A-Rig on an iPhone commercial? Very interesting interview.
Yeah, we talked about this one, I think, yesterday or the day before. Really great interview, actually. A real breakdown of how to approach iPhone production. And he was showing a new Tilt-A-Rig that I don't think is out yet. So it's one that he's helped design down that path. And so, so I think it's going to be interesting to see where that, iPhone production, I think we're going to see a lot. I think NAB is going to be a really interesting year for seeing what happens with iPhone production, because I think you're going to see tons and tons of rigs and add-ons. Next question.
James Hansen in Winslow, Cheshire, United Kingdom. What is the best use of AI you have seen for normal people to use? I use Grammarly and some ChatGPT for my marketing business. Thanks.
I use it a lot I think that we saw Liberty use it yesterday at a pretty, or is it yesterday, 2 days ago, at a very high level of just how to brainstorm for things and how to prompt well for things. As a regular person, I use it for most of my recipes. So most of my soups and recipes are all driven from, and my wife is on it on a daily basis, asking it just lots of random questions, including other recipes as well. So we use it. Recipes are really good when you're saying for normal people. I think ChatGPT has done really well there. I will say also, for cover letters and stuff like that, I can't write a cover letter as good as I find cover letters to be for almost anything to be tedious. And so I just say, I need you to cover this. These are the high points. Make me a cover letter, and it just makes one that's not any better than anything. It's better than anything I would write, because I'd be like, oh, this is really tedious, and I don't know why I'm bothering. And so it produces a great one that fulfills the little weird checkbox of I have to have a cover letter that goes out with this thing. It's kind of impressive. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I use Copilot, which is it incorporates DALL-E 2 for image generation and a chat bot that's equivalent of GPT-4. And you can upload pictures into it, have it analyze pictures. You know what a lot of people in Hollywood are doing now is they're loading their scripts, their spec scripts in, and having it do a summary or an elevator pitch. Create an elevator pitch for the script, and it'll go through the script and pull out the highlights and what's going to be the hooks and stuff in the show, and it'll give them a pretty decent elevator pitch that you'd have to memorize, but a nice, concise one.
Jeffrey.
So I use it for blog posts, and but I don't use what they give me for the blog post. I use it as a starter because I've written so many of these posts. It blends in, so it's like this great way to kind of get me kick-started, so I can then take out the stuff that doesn't make sense and then actually sculpt it to a blog post. Plus, there's a lot on WordPress. There's a lot of AI happening, like Yoast SEO will give you AI ability. Once again, I'll ask it for the AI post, but you definitely want to review it before you send it out.
Good, Bill.
When we had Michael Cioni on last week, I was really impressed with his breakdown into AI as generative AI or utility AI, and his kind of indication that utility AI, doing things like we're talking about now, letting it help you organize scripts or do repetitive tasks and things like that, it is astonishing for, and that is coming along really fast. The real creative stuff, I think, is more difficult, and I think it's going to be a long time before that gets, how do I put this, drivable, so that if I wanted to do something like generate a storyboard using generative AI to make up the scenes, that I would be able to control it well enough to get what I wanted without a lot of extra hassle. Maybe it'll be faster than I think, but I think that's going to lag these kind of utility uses, and I think Michael really helped me understand how that's going to fit into my world.
Next question.
Jay Patkin in San Diego says, what mic are you using?
I am using it is a Neumann TLM-102. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm using the same thing, Alex. I just wanted to be like you. No, actually, a little bit of trivia. We're coming up on 4 years here. Like next month is 4 years of this. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Jason and I are the only two panelists who have never changed microphones.
I change them all the time. I'm like, let's.
I know you change them like I change socks.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I have same thing. TLM 102. I had it when I was podcasting.
Yeah.
I like the way it worked on my voice. It's a very sensitive condenser mic, but we'll work out.
Yeah, good, Marty.
Yeah, I'm using an Audio-Technica AT4050, which is a multi-pattern microphone. I'm using it in the cardioid pattern. And I've tried a bunch of different microphones. I have a few. And this is the one that is cleanest, sounds the best balanced, and provides the best noise reduction naturally. I'm in a fairly noisy room.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, a microphone is a very personal choice, and in my case, I like the large frame condenser mics. This is the AKG 414, which is available in a – Chris is impressed that I have a second camera, sorry. And it does a great job. This is the first mic I started using on office hours three years ago. So it works great. And I have an U87 behind me, but that would be overkill. So AKG large diaphragm condenser for me.
Go ahead, Bill.
I use a Sennheiser MKH416 on the show because of its tighter pattern. Then I immediately take it down and I put on my Neumann TLM-103 for all my serious audiobook and other things work because it's way more precise and sensitive.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I have a lot of those microphones, but the one I'm using right now is the Stellar TechZone Audio Products Stellar X2, which is a very cheap microphone. It's under $200, and it is designed to sound like that Neumann U87 out there, and it does a pretty good job of sounding like it for something priced so low. It punches way above its price range.
100%. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
And I'm using the MV7 mostly because of the fact that I'm going directly in via USB in this computer. And of course the rejection. So if it gets about 2 feet away, it's harder to hear any type of sounds than here. And of course, keeping it as direct as possible. Very important.
Go ahead, Marty.
And, there are a bunch of microphones that I'd really like to try and something that I am going to try, I just have to go out and get a couple, are from Lewitt Audio.
Who are coming up next? So stay tuned for that. Next question.
Robert Sababity in Poland is back. I use the Mackie MDB USB DI box to get audio out of Mac Minis via the USB port to XLR. What do members of the panel use to get audio out of laptops and PCs?
There's a lot of them. There's a couple different ones that you can use there. I will admit, because I've had it for so long, the one that I use is not the cheapest one. This is a USB Pre 2, and this has got 2 XLR outs on the back, and it is USB, and it just shows up as an audio device. So there's no drivers required, but it is really expensive, and I've had them for many years. So that's the one that I use, but I would say that it's probably overpriced for those things. It really depends also how many channels you need. So I'm using it for a stereo output. Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, I've been using a media DI from OnStage. That's worked pretty well. There's no driver. It's class compliant. It's just USB in and 2 XLRs out with a volume control.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
I'm very particular about what I'm using. I have a music server, which is behind me here, that has my whole music category that I store. And it's using an RME ADI2 Black Edition, which is down here. You can barely see it flashing here. And it just has extremely good quality DACs in it. So I use it for the analog out, and I use it for the digital out. I use the digital to fill the whole room. So, and it's plugged into a Mac M1, and it can also be plugged into a Linux box, anything that's USB.
Yeah, and Guy Cochran suggests the SoundWire. This is the Sonect.com SoundWire. It's just a USB-C straight to two outputs. So just two outputs. So there's not a lot of control there, but it definitely can most likely work there. Also, Chris Sabato says that he uses the PV USB Direct. Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. Haven't heard much buzz about drones lately. Does the requirement of a license to fly make drones less desirable for individuals in small production companies?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
That's a nice pun there, Gordon. The reality is that, I had a couple drones and I had my FAA license, but trying to fly the drones and continue to, it's a skill. And I flew too many drones in the sides of buildings, so that's why I don't do it. I have a friend that does it, and the one thing that he focuses on is the drone flying, which means that he won't deal with the camera. So you'll have to bring a camera to put it on his drones, but he does a great job in flying those around. So I think it's becoming a very niche thing, but I don't think it's going away. It just it's a drone. It's pretty much.
Go ahead, Chris.
I think drones fall into that category of there's things we can do, but we shouldn't, and we did the same thing. It's like, oh, it's the cheapest 4K camera we own and it flies, that kind of madness. But we did it for a while. We crashed a bunch of them. And then we got to the point where it's like, just let somebody who really does this for a living do it, which is what I recommend you do with your editorial as well.
Courtney?
Yeah, for less than professional production. The DJI Mini 4, they came out with this new one, the Mini 4 Pro, that has really high resolution. It's under 249 grams, so there's no license required. You don't even have to have a transponder on it. So you could get away with using that. The footage that they have on their website, take a look at it, is astounding for something that is so small, so light, and so tiny.
Go, Bill.
Yeah, two things real quick. Number one, around me in San Diego, there's so much restricted government airspace because of all the marine and naval air bases that it's really hard to find places to fly, typically of airports too. The other thing is that when you do get permission, I want somebody on those controls who does it every day. And even in stock video, if I do drone footage San Diego, I get 75 or 100 really nice-looking, well-shot clips. So that limits the need for me to go out and shoot my own unless there's a specific need to get a particular property, and then I will hire somebody to do it.
Next question.
Paul Wallace, Hot Springs, Arkansas. What proportion of time does Courtney use to use Copilot, and how does it rank among the other AI tools?
Courtney?
I wish I had Copilot to help me find the darn mouse to click the button. I don't use it, that often, but whenever I do want to generate an image for something, I find the image generation DALL-E 3, whatever they're using, has gotten better. It's not near as good as Midjourney, not quite as good, but I think I've tried Gemini, the new Gemini from Google's Bard that they've now called Gemini, and I don't find it as good, near as good as Copilot. And I think Copilot is much more accurate. I am frustrated by all of the limitations that they put on it because they want to keep it politically correct for everything. So you can't make it draw images of anyone under 18. You can't make it draw images of any political person or any famous celebrity. It has to be just generic people. So if you're having it generate images, that's one problem. But I've had it generate, limericks and poetry and do other things like that. It's great for creating entertaining coloring books for the kids and little stories. So I find it fairly useful, and I use it occasionally for summarization and to analyze web pages. You get a web page that's 40 pages long. Having it analyze that does it in a few seconds.
And we'll be coming back with our second hour here in just a second. Just a quick reminder, of course, that we have Lewitt coming up here in just a moment, but we also have Altion showing up tomorrow. So Matt Camigula will talk about it. He's going to be talking a little bit about the production that's related to USDZ as well as spatial video. Altion is really on the forefront of that, so he's going to be talking a little bit about that. Friday, of course, we're going to talk about physical storage. And a reminder that later today, 11 a.m., we're going to have the Reader Workshop. So that's coming back as the Reader Workshop. So Mitch and Josh will be managing that. So take a look at the email that went out, and you can find out more about how you can become a reader for this show. Welcome back to the show, and I'm really excited to have Brian Fisher here from Lewitt. Brian is the channel marketing manager for Lewitt, and if you haven't seen a lot of the Lewitt mics, they make so many, they make so many mics, so many high quality mics, and it is exciting to have Brian here. They've also come out with a new interface, so that this is not, they're not just they're kind of moving into what's called the Connect 6, and the Connect 6 is there, and I think we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty there. I think on our video end of things. I'm sure the audio is working great, but we're going to kind of work through that. So while we work on that video pipeline there, let's go ahead and jump into. Oh, I guess we don't have that there. Brian, can you? Hi, Brian. Can you see us?
Hey, I can see you. For some reason, my DSLR camera feed just decided to not work when I moved over from backstage. But we're here with the HD built-in camera on my laptop. So.
It still looks great. It still looks great, and you sound great.
Thank you.
So
awesome.
that's
the important thing.
Yeah, that's really the most important thing is to sound good. And now, can you tell us a little bit about the history of Lewitt?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lewitt was founded in 2009 by our CEO, Roman Pershon. And so he had previously worked at AKG for a while and started to feel like, there really can be a lot more done in terms of innovation in the microphone space. And so he really took it upon himself to do that and to start Lewitt and to really make that the goal. Both to innovate in terms of microphones, but also to be able to provide a really good price to performance ratio as well, and to take advantage of cutting edge technology and modern manufacturing to do that. So that's kind of how it originally started, and it started with studio microphones, and then soon live microphones for the stage as well. And then more recently, we just released our first audio interface Connect 6, as you mentioned. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. And what would you say makes the Lewitt microphones stand out?
Yeah. So like I said, it's really kind of the user-focused approach of trying to solve problems. So one of those facets is providing what we call the record-ready sound. So it's providing a sound that sounds finished right out of the gate, that needs minimal EQ tweaking after the fact, kind of carefully tuning the mid-range and the high-end detail to make sure that it's going to cut through the mix and sound great on acoustic sources and on vocals. And so we really kind of strive for that. The other aspect that I think sets us apart is that we really lean on modern manufacturing and automated quality control so that we can offer the best quality mics with the best specs for an incredible price. And coming up with new ways to really push microphone tech forward, whether it's, our flagship mic, the 1040, which has, dual circuits, FET and tube, and multiple sound characteristics that you can change. And the fact that you can do that all remotely from your listening position instead of running back and forth to the power supply for the microphone. So things like that.
Now you have a wide range. So the entry level for the 240 is $99, or at least that's the list price, and then it goes up from there. What's happening from mic to mic that makes them more expensive? Like what's being added to those?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, one aspect is just the feature set. I think each microphone, as it ascends, typically has a different goal. So if you look at the 240 Pro, you have kind of a small diaphragm electret capsule. And, so as you go up from there, you get a full kind of 1-inch true condenser capsule in the LCT 440 Pure. That has substantially lower self noise as well. And as you go up from there, like the 540S has the lowest self noise of any mic we make. You also get, pad attenuation, low cut filters. And so feature set is a big one. And then you get into our tube microphones, which there's a lot of added cost with power supply and kind of the circuitry involved with that. But yeah, primarily as you're kind of ascending price, you're getting kind of more versatility, more features, as well as tighter tolerances on, sensitivities and frequency response. So when you look at mics like the 540S and the 640TS, any two will form a matched pair because we very closely do quality control so they all kind of fall within spec of a true matched pair.
Now you have a mic, the 441, which has 8 polar patterns. How's that actually generated when you start having those multiple polar patterns?
Yeah, so the 8 polar patterns with that microphone is to offer some more flexibility. So a lot of mics don't quite have that many. One of the things that we added that's unique is a reverse set of polar patterns so that you can use either side of the microphone as the front. And it was primarily just out of practicality because it does have buttons on the front of the microphone. And if you have that right up against the grill cloth of like an amplifier, it's going to be hard to change settings because you're not going to be able to see it. So it makes it so you can use it in either direction. And in terms of, actually creating polar patterns, that gets a bit more technical into, summing and phase flipping different captures from both sides of the diaphragm and stuff like that. But yeah, we definitely tried to offer as much kind of flexibility so you can kind of dial in the sound either direction.
Absolutely. And so one of the new things that you have now is the Connect 6. This is an interface, a USB-C interface for audio. Why did you go down that path from just using the mics?
So we went down this path just because we want to do more than just microphones. We want to really be able to continue to innovate in different ways, across the needs of, an audio content creator, a streamer, a musician, kind of serve the needs of all those people. And we had the technology to do so. We had been kind of working on audio interface technology for a while. And I think one of the needs that we saw actually, I think it came about through the Chinese market, because they do a lot of streaming, was doing a dual USB-C audio interface where you can connect a computer, 2 computers, or a computer and an iPhone, or a computer and an iPad, and run them simultaneously, be able to have audio in and out, and a ton of routing options and flexibility. So that's what we were trying to do with Connect 6, is make kind of the ultimate Swiss Army knife for streaming, content creation, and traditional recording of music as well.
Now, it's a pretty the design really stands out. How did you approach the design, the physical design of the interface? It looks a lot different than most of the ones that a lot of us have had in the past.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and we get that a lot. It's definitely a polarizing design. I think some people absolutely love it, and some people, are like, "What the heck? This looks like it's from a sci-fi film from the 60s or something like that." But yeah, the goal was to make it look different. I think with our mics too, there's enough microphones that all look like the standard silver tube that we've seen. And so one way to differentiate ourselves is to actually come up with a unique physical design and aesthetic. And I think we tend to lean into the more modern aesthetics with our microphones, even with the more kind of rectangular, shape and look to them. And with our interface, it, really came down to creating something super portable and just unexpected. We wanted it to fit nicely on a desktop and be sort of easy to use in that format. And we didn't want to just create a, standard rectangular box. And so yeah, that's kind of how the Connect 6 was born.
And how much processing is inside of the mixer? Is it mostly just a straight interface, or do you have a lot of processing that's available?
We do have DSP on board. So the different effects that you can use are, there's an expander to reduce background noise, and there's a compressor, there's a 4-band EQ, and then just a standard low-cut filter that you can toggle on and off. And and then we also have the maximizer, which is a limiter that you can put on 2 different mixes. So we have 2 mixes that you can create for creating separate headphone mixes, or specifically for like streaming if you want to create a unique mix for that, and then apply a limiter to, get the maximum level without risking clipping.
And when you set those settings, so let's say you add a compressor or an expander, does it require that software on the computer to every time it restarts, or is that kind of embedded into the? So could I set those up and then take that interface and send it to someone, and all they got to do is plug it in?
Yeah, you can. It will retain those settings when you unplug it. If you want to change the settings, obviously you need the software control. But the idea is when you unplug it, you could even use it just with a smartphone or an iPad, and all of your settings will be good to go as you set them before, even phantom power and stuff like that. Although you can control toggling off phantom power, adjusting preamp gain, all those kind of basic things on the physical UI of the device.
And have you tested it with an iPhone? Like being able to connect it? Because it's now that the iPhones have USB-C, all of us are like, what can we connect to the USB-C? so.
Yeah, totally. And I've used it, I still have the Lightning connector on my iPhone, but yeah, I use it all the time. It's great for capturing reference mixes. I'm a mixer myself, so if a band sends me a playlist, I'll capture some of those tracks just from my phone on Apple Music or whatever into my DAW, and it's super handy to have that input. But yeah, I send audio in and out, and you can send it to different mixes, and it'll also charge your phone. One thing, though, if you're using
does it require power?
So if you're not plugged into a computer via USB-C, then you'll need to plug into the power port, which is also a USB-C connection. And that will make sure that, you have enough power to operate the preamps and everything else on board, as well as, send to an iPad or mobile device. So
it's great. I think it's really fast. I think it's the only interface I've seen that is really designed to go to 2 different USB connections at the same time and have them both, be part of it. And can you send from one USB connection to the other one, like through the system, or is it both basically a kind of independent connection? So if I had an iPhone and I wanted audio to come out of my iPhone and into my computer, would that be possible?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the idea. I think there's a dedicated stereo pair of inputs that you'll get that you can assign in your DAW or whatever application you might be using to capture that mobile input directly. There's also dedicated inputs for mix A and mix B, and so you could mix a couple different sources together, including a mobile phone, and capture it to your computer. And then when you're sending audio to your mobile device, you have the same options where you can choose any specific input or software output from your computer to send to the mobile device.
It's really interesting. We've got some questions coming in from our online audience. Let's go ahead and jump into the first question.
Actually, mine was the first one that ended up in the queue, and I was just curious about where Lewitt falls in terms of accuracy versus musicality in your design and tuning.
Specifically with like the interface and the preamps that are built in, or just in general with
in general in your microphone design? Do you prize complete accuracy? I know it's not a measurement mic; these are for use in creative. So do you fall more along the lines of making the sound musical, or how close do you hew to getting as close to complete accuracy as you can?
Yeah, like I described earlier, we definitely have kind of a signature sound, which we tend to refer to as our record-ready sound, which has a little bit of added presence in the mid-range, a little bit of high-end detail, and it's been specifically tailored to sound very musical on vocals and acoustic instruments, especially. And, that's not to say we have the exact same frequency response for every single microphone. We take them case by case, and they do vary, especially our tube microphones. They lean more into the characteristics you would expect from a tube mic and are a little bit more full-bodied and warm-sounding, and a very kind of smooth top end to them as well. So yeah, we're definitely taking a very musical approach, and we aren't trying to, aim for as flat as possible or some specific target. Just in the same way that we're not trying to chase after a clone of a vintage sound or device from the past.
And it seems like there's a heavy focus on vocals and drums. Or are there other mics that are kind of halfway in between for a lot of the other instruments?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have certain mics that are very catered towards vocals or promoted that way, but they're really used kind of all over the place. You look at our most affordable kind of condenser mic, the 240 Pro, and we typically promote that as a vocal microphone, but time and time again, we've seen people use them and love them on guitar amp cabs and used on drum overheads in the studio and live. We've seen it a lot used live as well. So I think there's definitely a versatility. And I have heard a lot of comments about the sound of our mics on overheads, that they just capture a very natural sound of a kit in a room. So, but yeah, I also love our condenser mics on electric guitar and use them all the time that way. And one interesting partner that we have is Hit the Road Music, and he uses our mics traveling around the world, capturing all different types of world music and all different types of instruments and stringed instruments and wind instruments and hand drums and anything you can think of. And so, it's fun to see our mics used in those contexts too. So I think they are just inherently pretty versatile in that way.
And are you a musician?
I am, yeah. Guitar is definitely my primary instrument, but a little bit of keys, some bass guitar, definitely a vocalist as well.
Do you and by the way, for that interface, does it handle guitar outputs directly into it?
It actually doesn't have a guitar DI.
Right.
So
you just need to add that in between. Next question.
Josh Kaufman comes to us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Where did the idea for the Lewitt Music Mixing Challenge come from?
That is a good question. So we haven't really done one of these music challenges since I've been on board, which has been a couple years. But I know when they built the studio, the goal was really to create a space where we could record not only sound samples, but also invite in bands. And I think the mixing challenge was just a really cool way to use our studio space at the headquarters in Austria and to really show people how our mics sound in a very real context, and kind of the added fun of getting to hear a bunch of different mixes and interpretations of that. So I'm definitely all for doing another one as soon as possible. I just know there are a lot of logistics involved, but I'm definitely pulling for another one soon.
What type of studio do you have where is it in Austria?
Vienna.
Oh, nice. And is it used very heavily right now?
The studio there is used quite a bit because we use it as a multi-purpose space for content as well as for recording sound samples and all of that. So, and anytime we need to do mixing, it's in that room as well. So
it's great.
Used a lot.
Next, go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, I thought when I first saw the music challenge, I thought it was a brilliant marketing idea. Way to actively engage your customer base. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was, what it is, how it worked?
Yeah, so the basic idea of the mixing challenge was to invite a band to the Lewitt studio, record all the tracks with Lewitt microphones, and then offer that up to our audience to mix and put their own creative spin on those tracks. And we would take in all those submissions and listen to them and pick winners out of that. So really fun kind of interactive activity.
I love that idea because I think that there's something about listening to different people's creativity and how they handle different tracks. And a variety of companies have experimented with that, and in different ways, different artists, different companies. And I always find it to be fascinating. We were talking about it the other day. There was a band long ago that put out all the samples for one of their songs, and there were probably 1,000 versions of that song. It was just that were published. I mean, if you were in a rave club, you would hear one version of them somewhere, and they just said they made it out just like you guys just do whatever you want with them, and it was really successful. Next question.
I love that.
John Merrill in Phoenix, Arizona, wonders what mic you're using for this webcast.
Yeah, it's a good question. This is actually a pretty new version of a mic that we've made for a while, which is the LCT 440 Pure. It's our top-selling microphone worldwide. It's a pretty affordable mic. It's a large diaphragm condenser. And what's unique about this specific version is it's a special edition in rainforest green, and it has a nonprofit tie-in. So there's an NGO, the Rainforest of the Austrians, which we partnered with them because they have a program to preserve a Costa Rican rainforest and to do research there. And so we connected with the local university in Vienna, and there's been kind of a long history of musicians in Vienna supporting this project with proceeds from benefit concerts and things like that. So we thought it was just an awesome project that we wanted to support, and we know people love, different colors and kind of special editions in that way. So this was kind of a first experiment, and people have really loved it so far. So yeah, 440 Pure Vita edition.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. What are the electronics in the Pure Tube mic, and where does it fit in the market?
Yeah, the Pure Tube microphone has a very different circuit from any other tube mic we make. So we use that term kind of pure tube, similar to LCT 440 Pure, in that we're basically trying to distill down our sound and technology to a very simplified form factor and cost-effective package. And so, like I said, the Pure Tube is specifically optimized for vocals, and one of the main goals was to create a very, very quiet tube microphone, because traditionally, especially vintage tube mics can have a fairly high self-noise. And so they took a totally new approach to designing the circuit to avoid any semiconductors or capacitors in the signal path in order to bring down that self-noise to 7 dBA and, making it super, super quiet. So it is different circuit than any mic we make, and it has a very unique sound, I think, from any of our other tube mics as well.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Chris Fenwick in Emeryville, California, and here on the panel, on the Connect 6, what does the big knob do? Is that just volume for the headphones?
The big knob does everything. So that's like kind of the one control on the face of the interface. But basically, you can click the knob in order to select, headphones, speakers, preamp gain. And then if you're on the preamp, if you hold down the button, it'll turn on phantom power or turn off phantom power. So it's a multi-purpose knob.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Can I use the Connect 6 to provide the audio feed for live streaming to platforms that require using a mobile phone app like Instagram?
Yeah, so it definitely works well for those applications sending audio to mobile devices for streaming. In fact, we just did a big update to firmware and software to make it even easier. So one of the challenges in the past was around kind of controlling what audio you're delivering to Instagram and sort of how it treats that. Certain channels getting panned or turned to mono. So we have two different features that are great for streaming. One of them allows you to overwrite inputs 1 and 2 with any mix or source coming to Connect 6. So for applications that default to a sort of stereo input 1 and 2 kind of protocol. And then the other option is summing inputs 1 and 2 to mono. So if you have kind of a mono only streaming mobile application, it works well for that too.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, back again with what does Lewitt have to offer for the creator that wants to record vocals and acoustic guitar? What tips would you offer to get the best setup?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think for kind of an all-around starting point, the 440 Pure is amazing, I think, in terms of price point and a go-to for me for acoustic guitar and vocals. Like I mentioned, Pure Tube is really awesome, and it has some added, benefits of a little bit more of a tamed kind of high-end response and some tube saturation that you get with it. But yeah, this is always the first microphone that I would recommend to people, and it can be used easily. I do a lot of tutorials on how to record, especially acoustic guitar and vocals for Lewitt's YouTube channel. So I definitely would point you towards there as well as our blog if you want to see more in-depth content about mic placement and techniques to get vocal recordings and acoustic guitar recordings.
What do you think is that when you're thinking about mic placement from your perspective, what do you think is the most important thing to keep in mind?
That it sounds good. But I think, honestly, the biggest thing for people recording themselves at home is it's really easy to kind of rush through the process, and you get an input signal and, you're like, all right, good to go. You don't really critically listen back to what you recorded, make those small adjustments, and then go from there. Because it's a little bit more clunky if you don't have a dedicated engineer that's only focused on critical listening. And when you're trying to perform and be in that role, it can be tricky. So the biggest thing, honestly, is take the time to experiment with different placements and actually find one that sounds really good. And also make sure that you're listening to it in the context of the song, not just in solo, because ultimately that'll make mixing a lot easier for you.
Next question.
Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada is up next. Have you ever considered making a ribbon mic, or is there not much demand for those these days?
We get this question so much on our social media channels, but we don't have any current plans to create a ribbon mic. I think it's, for whatever reason, I think microphone companies don't often do, like, if they do ribbon mics, they just focus on that a lot of times, and kind of vice versa. But yeah, for us, I think we haven't really seen a strong way to, or I guess maybe like had the demand that we've seen to create some sort of new version of a ribbon microphone. I think they sound really unique and cool, and a lot of times they are aiming for a more vintage sound. So maybe that's also why we haven't, moved towards those types of microphones. But I think just condenser mics are a lot more versatile for a lot of different types of applications. So and dynamic microphones as well. But yeah, sorry, no current plans for ribbon mics.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back with what drove the choice of a 3.5 millimeter input on the Connect 6 for synths and other devices when most professional synths have 1/4 inch outputs?
So yeah, I think ultimately it was trying to make this a very user-friendly device, not only for, serious home recording musicians, but like I said, content creators and streamers. And I think, looking at the market globally as well. And so the sort of features that are being, looked for in other countries, in Asia and in Europe, can be different than the US. So we took all of those things into consideration when designing this device. And we wanted to really make it accessible for anyone to get into. And honestly, you can go line input to inputs 1 and 2, but I find it super useful to have the auxiliary input because I do have synth modules like the popular Roland JU06 module that has a 3.5 millimeter output. So it's nice to not have to look for adapters and just be able to use that.
Next question.
Todd Reynolds in North Adams, Massachusetts, violinist here. Is there an instrument mic in the chain comparable to the DPA 4099 or Neumann MCM-114?
Let's see. I'm actually not familiar with those microphones. And even kind of what type, if they're small diaphragm or large diaphragm. Or
yeah, I think they're little instrument mics that you would clip on a violin at some point and use that. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, we don't have any clip-on microphones. So nothing that provides that sort of utility, unfortunately, at this point. Our most compact instrument mic is the 040 match, but it's a small diaphragm condenser that isn't by any stretch a clip-on mic per se. But
makes sense.
Yeah.
Next question.
Robert Sababity in Poland. Which Lewitt microphone would you use to record a choir, 50 people, in a church, and what would be the layout?
I might use an array of our small diaphragm condenser mics. So we make the 040 match and then the LCT 140 Air stereo pair. And both of those are fantastic, especially the 140. You have two different modes, an air mode, which gives you kind of a lifted high end. That's actually the natural sound of the capsule and the way it's tuned. And then you have a flat mode, which gives you kind of the flattest frequency response. So that is, I guess, a case where you have, a very neutral sound that's aiming for accuracy. So I think that's a very versatile mic for instruments and choirs and in those kind of ensembles. In terms of setup, I don't have personal experience recording, choirs to give much authority on that. I think, sometimes people do spaced pairs or like a center mic and two side mics, XY pattern, from what I've seen. But again, I don't have personal experience engineering with a choir.
Next question.
Dave Troutman's back from Edmonton, Canada. There are lots of resources on your site to help people understand mic use. What prompted this?
Yeah, so I think, content is really important to build a brand and to really be able to show up in people's consciousness, to offer something of value. So from the start, we've made it a priority to offer educational content and information out there through the blog form and through video form. And I think just by being helpful and putting that information out there, it inevitably introduces people to the mics and audio solutions that we offer.
I think it's so important. I mean, the education is such an important piece of the connection between the a manufacturer and the audience, but also when people are better at using your mic, they're more likely to keep using it. And so
totally.
It's like people can very quickly make decisions about something works or doesn't work based on sometimes erroneous information. So being able to have a kind of this is the known way to do it, I think makes a huge difference. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. The pictures on your website, like the one for the LCT 440 Pure, show the mic attached to an articulating arm. Is that included with the mic or a third-party product?
So that is not included with the microphone. That is a third-party product. I'm not even exactly sure off the top of my head what product that is, but what you do get with the 440 Pure is the shock mount comes with it, and you also get a pop filter that magnetically attaches to the shock mount. You get a windscreen and a transport bag.
I love the idea that you have a magnetic pop filter. I'm sorry, I just have to deal with a lot of pop filters, and there's always like, how do I attach the thing to the thing? If it's not,
that's what I'm using right here.
It just snaps. It just snaps on. If you just pull out, so it's kind of set up that way, and it just kind of aligns itself as it pops on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Hopefully you hear a big clank right there, but
good.
and you can upside down whichever way, and it stays on, and so it's great low profile. So if you're on camera, you don't have like a big pop filter in front of your face.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Next question comes from Robert Sababity in Poland. Can the Connect 6 be used for an entry-level user without using the control center?
Yeah, so the Connect 6, I mean, there's definitely a lot more power you can access, with control center. But if you want to use it just for the basic inputs and just plug it in, and it's very intuitive and plug and play. We definitely designed it to be very easy to use for anyone.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you haven't talked about it yet, but there is a app for that control center, isn't it, that runs on Android or that can be used to control that the Connect 6 as well, a simpler version of the version that runs in a window. And does it have to be connected via USB, or does it connect over Wi-Fi?
So it has to be connected via USB to use the mobile phone functionality. And we actually don't make a mobile version of Control Center. So what you're seeing in that picture is actually, a mobile version of a DAW on a mobile phone or some kind of, mixer associated with streaming. So that could be slightly misleading, but Control Center is just for a typical desktop application. And so you'll need that in order to control it. And so if you're doing a setup where you're only connected to a mobile device, you would need to set your settings via a laptop or other computer on Control Center before you move to that workflow.
Good, Marty.
Brian, how well will the Connect 6 work with like low output dynamic microphones?
Yeah, great question. So this has a ton of gain. So each preamp has 72 dB of gain, which is more than enough for, really low sensitivity dynamic broadcast mics. You probably know what I'm referring to. So you don't really need a cloud lifter for use in this, or low output ribbon mics as well. It works great for that, and super low noise floor. So that's another big benefit of the preamps on this device.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I noticed all of your microphones are 48-volt condensers, I think. Have you thought of creating a built-in USB mic, all in one? I know you're selling a Connect 6 preamp, so that might cut into your marketing plans. But do you make a USB mic, or have you thought of creating a USB mic for all the podcasters out there that don't need to use an interface?
Yeah, so we did make a USB mic for a while. It was like the DTG 640 or some. I don't remember the exact model number. It's now discontinued, but we did for a while. And we have kind of played around with the idea of bringing back a version of that at some point. I think in general, the demand wasn't super high for that microphone, but it is something that's still on our radar that we're considering for sure. And I also want to say too, we have a lot of condenser mics for sure, but we also have a great line of dynamic microphones as well. Not only like handheld vocal mics, but the MTP-440DM, which is a great dynamic instrument mic for snare and guitar amps, and some great tom drum mics, kick drum mics, kind of all sorts of stuff there too.
Next question.
The next question is one of mine. I was just curious if there are any trends that you're following that are coming in either manufacturing or design that you might see being important in the future for recording. Anything that everybody's talking about in the shop that is like, this is coming toward us?
Yeah, that is a good question. Let's see. The only thing I can think of recently that was kind of like a new feature that was interesting is seeing some, USB mics that have 32-bit float option for recording, which is a really interesting concept, I think. Kind of curious, how that's played out if people are actually using 32-bit float that much, if they're using a USB microphone. But yeah, there's actually not too many I can think of that are like larger trends. I think one thing that I've continued to see is just remakes of older microphones all the time. Just our market is just so dominated by that. And it's funny to me that, we can just keep churning out the same thing in a new package over and over. But
yeah, I think that actually 32-bit makes more of a difference for someone who's getting started than an experienced recording recordist, because you end up with a wider range of that you can still a wider range of record that you can still grab usable content from.
Fix it in post mentality.
There's a lot more fix it in post that's available to you if you do it that way. Next question.
Next one comes from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. What's the best part of your career working in the sound industry? For example, what is your favorite thing you get to do?
Oh, that is a good question. I think one of my favorite things, which is top of mind because I was just in LA for NAMM, and around that we got to do some really cool artist events, and I also got to do some content at some really cool studios, including Sound Factory in Hollywood, where a bunch of iconic recordings like Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, and Jackson 5, I Want You Back, and a bunch of classics were recorded there. And so getting to interview different engineers and do content in those contexts and get to see some of these spaces is really, really fun for me. I also got to do a tour of Atlantic Records and talk to them about their studios and writing rooms and how they work with artists in their studios for creative spaces for their label. And so, yeah, just really, really fun. I enjoy that aspect a lot of getting to meet people from all different corners of this industry.
Next question.
Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada is up with the next question. Have you given any thought to interacting with your customers directly outside of your blog, such as hosting question sessions?
Yeah, so actually something we did recently was kind of a more social media-based Q&A. So we just put out a call for any and all questions through, Instagram and Facebook and all the different platforms. And then we did a series of 3 short-form videos answering kind of the most common questions we saw. And this was something that I pushed for because I love these kinds of Q&As and getting to interact with the audience that way. So you can find that. That's a new thing that we did. I think we'll continue to try and do sort of Q&A sessions in some format because, yeah, I think that's definitely an important way to interact.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh is back with, how does your experience as a performer aid you in your role at Lewitt as a marketing manager? Is it more important to be familiar with the product line and specs or the practical application of using the equipment in the way that a customer would?
Yeah, I think, they hit the nail on the head with it's important to understand the customer and what they're thinking about and what's important to them. So I think being a musician and a mixing engineer and all of that really, really is helpful because, I think anyone can learn a product line and learn on paper sort of what the specs are and sort of what the USPs are in certain products, but actually being able to relate, even in terms of artist relations or other types of marketing partnerships, you really need to be able to speak the language, and it really helps to connect with people if you have real world experience. So a ton of employees at Lewitt are either musicians or audio engineers of various kinds as well.
Next question.
Marty Atius, Maryland. You mentioned the ability to remotely control some mic settings. How remotely can they be controlled over the internet?
So the microphone I was referring to is the LCT 1040. And so this is kind of our flagship microphone system. And I say system because it's just got a ton going on in terms of there's 2 parallel circuits, a FET circuit and a tube circuit that you can seamlessly kind of blend between. You also have dedicated outputs for those. And 4 different tube voicings that give you different frequency responses and levels of saturation. So with all of those different controls, we definitely saw the need for the engineer to be able to easily change those things on the fly. And so what we did is we created a power supply that had a top part of it that you can remove. And then when you remove that top part that has the controls on it, you can connect it to the power supply via a standard XLR cable. And that allows you to digitally control all those settings. So in a typical studio setup, you can have the power supply close to, the microphone, and then you can patch the power supply through the XLR tie lines to the control room, and then they can have that controller right on the desk. So you do need an XLR cable. It's not wireless remote, but it's designed in a way where it works for, most recording workflows in that way.
Next question.
Michael Jones in Los Angeles, California is up with this. Which would be comparable mics for the venerable Shure SM58?
The 58. So in terms of live handheld microphones, the MTP 250DM and the MTP 550DM are kind of our, sort of entry point handheld vocal dynamic microphones. And what I love about both of them is the frequency response on them, again, just sounds really good right out of the gate. I think where, a 58, takes a little bit of EQ to get it sounding, present and modern and kind of cutting through the mix. And, the 550 especially just sounds kind of ready to go right out of the gate. And it also is very feedback resistant, has a very consistent polar pattern with good rejection. So you get some additional benefits, and it's about the same price point. as a 58.
Next question.
Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota is following the dynamic trail. Are there any larger capsule dynamic mics in the works?
We might have something in the works in that regard.
I was like, oh.
I can't give any details on it, but yeah, it could be coming. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Very good. Brian, thank you so much for your time spent with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. This was really fun.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, and thanks to to all of the producers watching the show, asking all the questions and live as we roll through this. We really appreciate all of your input, both in the first hour and the second hour. Thanks to the panelists for the first hour and the second hour. We can't do this without you. It gets to be a really boring show. It's just me. You're talking, so we really appreciate your participation there. And thanks to the incredible team, the small village that is required every single day, 7 days a week, to make this show happen. We've got a development team that's making the software that makes this work. We've got production teams that are cutting the show. We've got management teams figuring out who's going to be on and making sure that they're ready to go. And we appreciate all of your contributions to the show. We can't do it without any of you. We traveled today. If we had to wander around and ask these questions person by person, the Tlaloc traversal would be 90,000 miles that we would have had to cover. That's 146,000 kilometers, and that is 719 bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into after hours.
Million bananas.
Million. Yeah, it's not 1719. It's 1719 million.
Really
bananas
long bananas.
Yeah, exactly. Really big bananas. So, yeah. Hey, Brian, that was great.
Brian. Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking for that high
Thank you.
ILPR40 killer coming out, that dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, really fun stuff.
I've used those small dynamics, the small condensers and the handhelds with great success in places with terrible acoustics. They work great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I really love the dynamic microphone, the MTP 440DM. It looks similar to like an SM57, but the mid-range bump on it is a little bit lower than the 57, and it also has more low end and more high end. So it's like kind of an in-between between a condenser and dynamic when you think about like miking a snare. So a little more high fidelity, but it sounds really, really cool.
It's awesome. Thanks so much. All right. See you later.
Bye-bye.